So guys, going into this offseason, everybody knew Pittsburgh needed a real number 2 receiver opposite DK Metcalf. Just some other tall body on the outside that can actually win one-on-one and take pressure off him. And instead of going out and spending big in free agency for it, the Steelers went out and made a trade that honestly nobody really talked about at the time. Gave up basically nothing, a late-round pick, and got a former college guy back that immediately intrigued me. And now, a few months later, people are starting to come out and talk about this guy in a way that's honestly turning heads. We're talking a former player, a national analyst, even the guy's own head coach, all saying pretty much the same thing about him. So stick around because I'm going to break down exactly what they're saying and why I think this trade might end up being one of the smartest moves Pittsburgh made all offseason. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Steelers. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
So, let's get into it then. This trade happened a few months back now, and I remember when it went down, it barely made a blip. Everybody was so locked in on Aaron Rodgers coming back, on Mike McCarthy getting hired, on the draft, that this move with the Indianapolis Colts kind of just slid under the radar. But now that we've had some time to sit with it, and now that we're starting to hear what people around the league actually think about this guy, I think it's time we give this trade the attention it deserves. Let me lay out what actually happened here, because I think a lot of fans don't even realize how cheap this was. The Steelers sent a 2026 sixth-round pick to the Indianapolis Colts, and in return, they got back Michael Pittman Jr. and a 2026 seventh-round pick. So right there, just from a pure draft capital standpoint, Pittsburgh basically flipped a sixth for a seventh and got a starting caliber receiver thrown in on top of it. I mean, when you break that down using the actual draft value chart, the Jimmy Johnson chart that everybody in the league still references, the gap between those two picks, that late sixth and that seventh, it's like 4 points of value. That's nothing. That's basically the same pick. So essentially, Pittsburgh got Michael Pittman Jr. for what amounts to a late-round pick swap. That's the kind of value that makes you sit back and go, okay, how did more people not talk about this at the time? And look, I get it. When a trade doesn't involve a first-rounder or a big-name superstar, it's not going to trend on social media, but that doesn't mean it's not important. Sometimes the best moves a front office makes are the quiet ones, the ones where you go out and get a guy who fits exactly what you need without giving up anything of real substance. And that's exactly what this was for Pittsburgh.
Now, why did they even need this guy in the first place? Going into the offseason, everybody kind of agreed that Pittsburgh's receiver room needed another real threat next to DK Metcalf. You had one legit outside guy who could win matchups, and then not a whole lot of proven production behind him. So getting a guy like Michael Pittman Jr., somebody who's had real production in this league already, that's exactly the kind of move you want to see a front office make, especially when it costs you next to nothing. Now here's where it gets interesting to me, because it's not just me sitting here saying this was a good move. I've seen multiple people, guys who actually know football at a really high level, come out and say pretty much the same thing about Michael Pittman Jr. and what he can bring to Pittsburgh. Now, if I throw some light on the first guy who's been talking him up, it's James Harrison. And look, when a guy like that, somebody who played the game at the level he did, comes out and says something about a player, I think you kind of have to sit up and listen. James Harrison actually said on his podcast that he thinks Pittman could have the best season of his career in Pittsburgh, and his reasoning behind it was pretty specific too. He talked about how Pittman is a great route runner, how he uses his body well to position himself, how he's tough to deal with in traffic, how he's got good hands, and how he's got a knack for finding the soft spots in a defense. I mean, that's not just generic praise, right? That's somebody breaking down actual traits, and when it's coming from a guy who understands the game at that level, I think it carries a lot more weight than your typical hot take. Now, if I move on to the next guy who's been talking about this, it's Matt Harmon over at Yahoo Sports. And honestly, this is the one that stood out to me the most because he made a point that I think gets overlooked a lot. He said he thinks the odds are pretty close on Pittman actually outproducing DK Metcalf this season in Pittsburgh. And his whole reasoning behind that, it comes down to fit with Aaron Rodgers. Because we all know Rodgers, at this stage of his career, he wants to play a certain style. He wants to spread guys out, get the ball out fast, work those quick access throws. And when you actually go back and look at the routes Pittman was running last year, the flats, the curls, the quick hitches out of that Z receiver spot, I mean, those are exactly the routes that fit what Rodgers likes to do. So it's not just that Pittman is talented, it's that his skill set lines up perfectly with what the quarterback wants out of his receivers. And honestly, guys, that's something I don't think about enough when I'm evaluating a receiver fit. We talk about size, we talk about speed, but we don't always talk about whether a guy runs the routes that his quarterback actually likes throwing. And when you've got that kind of alignment, that's when things click fast.
Now, the next piece of this, and I think this might be the most important one, honestly, is what Pittman himself has said and what Mike McCarthy has apparently told him about his role going forward. Pittman talked about how in Indy, his role was mostly short and intermediate stuff, and he said he always felt like he had more to offer than what he was being asked to do. And now with Pittsburgh, he's talking about Mike McCarthy wanting to diversify his role, open things up for him. And guys, that's a big deal, because Mike McCarthy doesn't do that for just anybody. If you look at his history, when he had a guy who could only do one specific thing, he kept him in that lane. But when he's had a guy who can do it all, a guy like Jordy Nelson back in Green Bay or CeeDee Lamb in Dallas, he opens the offense up for him. So the fact that he's already talking about doing that for Pittman, that tells you something about how highly this coaching staff already thinks of him. And then on top of all that, you've got Pittman himself talking about how excited he is to be in Pittsburgh. He mentioned getting to sit down with Omar Khan and Mike McCarthy and how that conversation got him fired up about the opportunity. He talked about loving that tough, physical brand of football that this organization has always been about and how he feels like it fits him perfectly. So when you put it all together, you've got the player wanting to be here, the coach building a role specifically for him, and outside analysts and former players all pointing at the same upside. That's 4 different angles, 4 completely separate sources all lining up and saying the same thing about this guy. Now, let's talk about the money side of this too, because I think that's just as important as the on-field fit. Pittman signed an extension that runs through the 2028 season, and it's coming in at an average value of under $20 million a year. And when you look around the league right now at what teams are paying for a legitimate number 2 receiver, you're talking $30–35 million a year for that kind of production. So getting a guy like this locked up at a discount on a deal that's going to outlast Aaron Rodgers' time in Pittsburgh, that's the kind of value that pays off for years, not just this season. Whoever ends up at quarterback after Rodgers, they're going to have a legitimate weapon already under contract at a below-market price. That's just smart team building, honestly.
So when I step back and look at everything Pittsburgh did this offseason, and there was a lot, bringing back Aaron Rodgers, hiring Mike McCarthy, drafting Jameer Bernard, signing Jamel Dean, locking up Nick Herbig, all of that gets the headlines, and I get why those are the flashy moves. But when I really sit down and think about which move might end up mattering the most a year or 2 from now, I keep coming back to this trade because it cost them almost nothing. It fits exactly what this offense needs, and it's already getting praise from every direction you can think of. I mean, honestly, guys, this is the kind of move that if it goes the way people are expecting it to go, we're going to look back on it and wonder how it flew under the radar for this long. A guy who fits his quarterback style perfectly, a coach who's already building around him, and a contract that's a straight-up bargain for what he brings. That's about as good as it gets for value in this league. So I want to hear from you guys on this one. Now that we've had a little more time to see how everything's playing out, how would you actually grade this trade for Pittsburgh? Drop it in the comments. Let me know what you think about Michael Pittman Jr. joining this offense and whether you think he ends up being the steal of the offseason like I do. Appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss anything, and I'll see you in the next one.